Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Sam and this is The Lonely Chapter, a show where we speak to interesting people, finding out their stories, discovering what motivates them, whilst also learning from their highs and their lows. Today, it's a solo episode. It's just myself. And some of you who follow me on Instagram may have seen that recently I completed a trilogy of extreme triathlons over the course of the last few months. Today, I just want to break that down, find out why I signed up to it in the first place, lessons I learned from it, and why I think that pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones is so important. Thank you for listening. This one was made for your enjoyment. Quick acknowledgement before I get started is I just want to say a massive thank you. This is episode 25 and those 25 episodes have absolutely flown by. So I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for all the support that everyone's been giving me. Continue to share the show where you enjoy it and to people who you think will enjoy it as well. It really, really helps me. Quick thank yous aside, let me take you back in time a bit. So in terms of challenges, some of you who listened to one of my previous episodes about the 5 books that changed my life the most to date would have noticed that I spoke about David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me. And whilst talking about that, I spoke about the fact that within 5 minutes of putting that book down and finishing it, I'd signed up to Brighton Marathon. That was the first real time where I'd really signed up for something that was going to push me massively, an actual event, an actual thing to train for. And I signed up for that, and that experience in itself was the start of the challenges. That's where I really got the buzz for pushing myself. So a quick talk through of that event was I was going for a sub 4 hour time. I lined up at the start feeling really good. I'd done the training. I lined up with the paces for the sub 4 hours and we set off, and it was great. It was going well. About mile 10, everyone's mile markers on their watch compared to the mile markers that we were running past started to offset, and we were about half a mile out. We didn't really realize why. So we carried on, and about halfway through the race, 13, 14 miles in, the pacers turned to us and said, "Look, guys, we realize why this is happening." And what we think's happened is where the turnaround point of the course was, it's been laid out a bit too far. So they've added on an extra half mile to the circuit. Don't worry though, we're going to still go for a sub 4 time. We just need to pick up the pace a bit. So those of you who are runners will understand this a bit better, but the pace picked up from about 9:09 miles, which is your sort of 4-hour marathon pace, to about an 8:20 mile. 8:20 minutes. And that's a big jump, especially when you're 14 miles into a race. But at that point, I wasn't really thinking about it. You can't really think of things. So I went with it. I stuck with it for about 4 to 5 miles. And about mile 19, mile 20, the wheels fell off. That banner, that 4-hour marker, just started getting further and further away. And it was really, really tough. Those last 5-6 miles were an absolute slog. And that was the first time where I've really hit the wall. I've really been in that state where my mind, everything's just telling me to stop, but my legs just kept shuffling. I made it to the end, and it was a real slog. Anyone who knows the Brighton Marathon route as well, the last 5 to 6 miles are running through a business park. So it's like just warehouses. There's no one there, no one supporting you. It's just quietness and people shuffling their feet or walking. And it was a hot day, so some people just on the floor at the sides, wrapped up in foil, getting treated. So it was a really interesting last 5 miles, just mentally trying to get through that. But I made it. And from there, I suppose my challenge fire was lit, if you like. So going into last year, so 2023, that was a year of some challenges for me, primarily pushed by my partner as well. So first one we did came up with was her idea. So we did 24 hours on a treadmill, and that was to raise money for the Samaritans charity, who I now volunteer with as well. So that was a really tough one in terms of being in the same place, just in a gym, on a treadmill for 24 hours with just each other for company. It was a real mental test. Obviously, the speed varied through the night, but it was a real mental test, that one, because of being in that one spot. Later that year, I'd signed up to do a half Ironman, so an Ironman 70.3. And that was tough again. I'd signed up and I'd trained well for it. I was really excited. Swimming, I was awful at when I started the training, and I'd actually got pretty good at it by the time it came round. So on the morning when the thunder and lightning meant that the swim was cancelled, it was really difficult. And it's a shame because it sort of feels like I didn't do the full thing because I just did the cycle and then the run. But I still enjoyed that experience, and it was still my first experience of really going over that marathon time wise. So that was about just over 4 hours, the marathon, whereas this took me just over 5 hours. It was that first step towards much longer endurance events. And then lastly, that year, we finished off again through my partner's finding. It was called Trail Walker, and that's a 100-kilometre walk through the South Downs Way. So that's anyone who knows the UK, it's from around Portsmouth area to Brighton is where it finishes. The event, at least, the South Downs Way runs a bit further. But the event was awesome, really, really good. So you had 30 hours capped to do it. So there was 3 of us, me, my partner, and Roland, who was actually a guest on one of the early episodes of this podcast. And that experience was really good as well. We went from, I think it was a 7 a.m. set off. So we went through the day, through the night, and we got there just after maybe 9 o'clock in the morning the following day. So I think with stops, it was about 26 hours, but some really good mental challenges in there, physical as well. My partner especially, both of her knees decided to give up, but we just taped them up, bandaged them up as tightly as we could and just kept moving. And it was phenomenal to see from a third person aspect that grit as well, knowing that I'd sort of done that in the marathon, being able to see that from an outsider's perspective. And yeah, that was really interesting. So that leads me into this year. So 2024, once I got past that trail walker, I didn't have anything else on the calendar. So I started to look around and I thought maybe I could do another half Ironman because I didn't really do it properly the first time. Maybe I could even do a full Ironman. But then I heard of the ROC Trilogy. This is a triathlon with a twist. So the basic layout of the ROC triathlons is that you start off with a swim, you then cycle to the base of a mountain. So it's either going to be Snowdon in Wales, Scafell Pike in England, or Ben Nevis in Scotland. You then run/hike, mostly hike, I would say, up the mountain, back down the mountain. You get back on your bike and you cycle back to where you started, where you just do a little 1 kilometre victory run, which by that point is, again, just a little shuffle. So why did I choose the ROC? I think it was different to anything else out there. So triathlons are triathlons. They are your 3 sports in that order. And the idea of breaking that cycle into 2, splitting it up, made that feel a bit more fresh. Also throw in the fact that it's a mountain in the middle as opposed to just a run. Why not just make it tougher? The chance to get to go and climb the 3 peaks. So I've only ever climbed Snowdon before this. So the chance to go and experience those and get the views as well was something that I really wanted to do. It sounded horrible, which by all means should have put me off. But I think that's also something that drew me to it. So talking of that challenge and really pushing myself, when something is horrible or it sounds like "Oh, I could never do that." Those are the ones that I want to sign up to because I want to know if I can do it. And there's only one way to know you can do it. So I signed up for the trilogy. You can sign up for one race in each of the countries if you want to, but I signed up for all three as a package, and you get a little hoodie or something at the end when you finish all three. So I thought, why not commit to it? It's going to take up most of 2024 training for it. So the training started pretty much straight away. So the end of 2023 into 2024. And the training was tough. It was intense. I was trying to balance my cardio and improve my cardio whilst also maintaining and improving my workouts in the gym, weightlifting side of things as well, keeping my strength up. And I owe a lot of that to Omnia Performance as well. So Fergus Crawley, Johnny Payne, their programs were pivotal for me. Like, they were fantastic, that I had something to follow. Did I follow them to the letter? Probably not, no. But I think that's one of the points as well. One of the lessons to take out of it is you don't have to be consistent in terms of every single day, always, and one day missed will be the end of it. Consistency is over a much wider period, and that goes for everything in life, really. But that consistency of training over the months leading up to it, if I missed a day or two here in a week, I may be gutted for a moment, but then I got to think of the bigger picture, and that really puts it into perspective. And obviously over time, that's what pays off. Also, going into the three races, so mentality wise, before going into the races, I was definitely in a place where I wasn't 100% sure whether I could do it. Even though I'd done like one or two or none at the time, I still doubted myself a bit because I'd missed a few workouts here and there. And even though I was telling myself that this consistency it mattered more over a longer period of time, it still got in my own head. So that was a lesson for me, looking back on where I've got the evidence now that consistency over a long time is the thing that matters. And I can take that forward with me as well. So I'm going to go into the specifics of each race slightly. So I'm just going to talk about each event and what they consisted of and certain challenges that I came up against during them, because each one was different in its own way. I learned different things from different events. So starting with Wales, so that was in May, that was the 11th of May. And it was a 1.5 kilometre swim, a 50 kilometre bike to the bottom of Mount Snowdon. It's a 6 kilometre route up Snowdon, which is 1,085 metres of elevation. Then you've got 6 kilometres back down and 50 kilometres back to the start on the bike, where you did a little beach run, which is a 1 kilometre run. So you just ran out along the beach and came back. And that was an interesting one, mostly because I hadn't done one before, I suppose. So my nutrition side of things, but also my prep in terms of recceing the route. So the swim went well. The swim on all of them, to be fair, went pretty well. It's gone from being one of my worst, definitely my worst out of the three, to being one of my most consistent potentially out of the three as well, which is really good to see that I've managed to train that. It was tough to prepare for because I hadn't done one before, so I didn't really know what I was going to do. So the nutrition side of things, I didn't quite get right. On the bike leg out there, by the time I got to that transition at the bottom of the mountain, my stomach was not in a good way. I won't go into the details, but yeah, I had a bit of stomach pain and we sorted that out. And it was a lesson learned. On the way back on the cycle, I then noted another reason of why my nutrition hadn't been good. And that was I started cramping up badly. So about 30 minutes from the finish, maybe 10, 15 kilometers out from the finish, cramp hit me. I was climbing a hill and I suddenly screamed out in pain. My quad cramped up. I couldn't unclip quick enough. And I just about managed to get off and just stretch it out for a second. So that was an interesting one. And that was probably down to not having enough electrolytes on the day. Um, that was what I put it down to anyway. And I made that adjustment going forward, and it was a lot better, as I'll discuss. In terms of the actual mountain, so on the cycle out there, there was a local competitor and we were sort of chatting on the bike. And he said, "Have you ever been up this route before?" And I said, "No, actually, I haven't. I haven't even looked at it." And he said, "Just leave something in your legs. The last kilometre or two are brutal." And that probably saved me, because I then just eased off a tad, and he wasn't lying. The last kilometre or two of that climb, so it's the Watkins path up Mount Snowdon, it gets really, really, really steep, and it's a scramble. So you get your hands involved as well. Big steps, big rocks. Yeah, really tough last couple of kilometres. And so that was a really interesting thing. And again, another lesson for me to really look at the route beforehand. Got back to the finish. I limped the last 1 kilometre of the race. As I said, the cramp on the way back on the bike, I managed to just about hold it off, and I could feel it trying to cramp up for the whole little 1 kilometre run. And as soon as I crossed the finish line, there's a video of me somewhere crossing the finish line. If you look closely, you can see my quad muscle on my right leg just suddenly squeeze up. And yeah, I was in quite a bit of pain for a little while, but I'd done it. And it was, again, getting into that same bunker that I was in during the marathon, and that pain, and just realizing that my body can keep going, even though my mind's telling me to stop. Like, what are you doing? I also realized my cycling needed to improve a bit more. So my cycling out of the three probably was the worst, in terms of that it made up such a large amount of the race at 50 kilometers each way. But yeah, we took those forward and we took them into England. So England was the 7th of September. So that was more recent. That again was a 1.5 kilometer swim. It was a 45.5 kilometer bike ride, so slightly less. 8.75 kilometers up Scaffold Pike, so it's a longer route. Top of Scaffold Pike is 978 meters, but this route went up and down multiple times. So the actual elevation came in probably closer to 1,100 to 1,200 meters, I would say. 8.75 kilometers back down Scaffold Pike, and then 45.5 kilometers return to the start before the little 1 kilometer run. So I learned a lot in terms of nutrition. So what I did on this one, so the first race, my electrolyte powder / carb powder was one item. It was just one powder altogether. I then went to a brand, Awesome Supplements, which I've spoken about before, and I've had Ben Coomer, the CEO of them, on as well. And with that one, it allowed me to adjust it. So I could put in the electrolytes, and I could choose how many scoops of the carbs powder I was going to put in. So I had more for the bike leg, more for the climb up the mountain, and maybe less for the way down. So I was able to adjust it slightly more and adjust those ratios. The one thing from the first race that worked really well that I kept was Kendall Mint Cake. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it is like sugar and peppermint extract like melted down together and just recreated into a bar. So it's just a bar of sugar which has a mint flavor, and it's excellent for energy. So I think they took it up the first time they went up Everest. That was one of the things they took up for nutrition, just for that energy hit, and it didn't disappoint. So I kept that. It was a super, super hot day on that one, on the England race. So that was an extra challenge, maintaining my hydration levels during that. And again, that's something that I could have done better, and I could have seen coming maybe. The mountain climb was rough because of that. So the cycle out was okay. Once I got on the mountain, the first 4 kilometers of the climb were in the valley with no wind and with the sun beaming down on me, and it was hot. Like, I was struggling, and I didn't think I was going to make it. I just kept putting a foot in front of the other foot, really, really slow. And then about 4 kilometers up the climb, I suddenly got this breeze, and I must have just come up over a ridge, and I felt the breeze, and it was one of the best feelings I've ever had in terms of, oh, I can now do this. Like, just in that moment, hearing that, feeling that. So the rest of the climb was tough because of the ups and downs that I spoke about. There was multiple times where I went back down to come back up, which added a lot more elevation, and hence the length of the climb being 8.75 kilometers. When I got to the top, I'd actually run out of water, expecting there to be some emergency water because that's how it was meant to be. But in hindsight, I imagine a lot of people had been using the emergency water because of the day, because of the weather, and they'd run out. So I had to set off again, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to find this water. So I carried on, and I found a steward maybe a kilometer later on the way down, and she was very generous. She gave me the last little bit of water she had. I gave her a few Skittles in return, so it was fair trade, but it is what it is. And yeah, it really, really saved me potentially there. And a bit further down, I found a mountain stream. I took the risk and I filled up my water from the stream. It was a running stream. I didn't have any issues coming off the back of that, luckily. But yeah, it was a little bit sketchy, but it was nice. It was good. I had to have something. So I took that risk. The bike back was a lot better this time, so I managed to maintain my momentum. I'd learned from the previous time where I'd gone into climbs with no momentum and then had to really grind out the climbs. So carrying that momentum into each climb was a lot better. And the nutrition side of it meant that I didn't cramp up like I did in the first race. So that was a real bonus. But yeah, the main challenge of that one was the heat on the day. That was a really, really tough day. In terms of that. So that brings me to the most recent one, and that was last weekend. So that was the 5th of October, and that was Scotland. So that was a little bit different, and that's mainly because of the bike leg. So the way Scotland worked was the same. It was meant to be a 1.5 kilometre swim. It's a 26 kilometre bike leg, but it's an off-road mountain bike route mostly, with 700 metres of elevation each way on that bike leg as well, which was just absolutely brutal. It was 8.2 kilometers up Ben Nevis, which is normally it's a 1,345 meter elevation. They cut it to 1,250, so we didn't actually summit. But that was because of the weather at the top was 60-mile-per-hour gusts. So for safety, unfortunately, we didn't go right to the top, but we went pretty far. 8.25 kilometers back down Ben Nevis, and then that 26 kilometers bike leg return before the little 1K run at the end. So this one, the weather was a lot colder. So setting off that morning, we weren't sure whether the swim was going to happen. And I was sort of having flashbacks to the Ironman, thinking, oh, if I don't do the swim, I'm not going to feel like I've done it. I know that feeling. So I was just praying that it was warm enough to swim, and it was. It wasn't warm enough to do the full amount, so they reduced it to a 1 kilometer swim. So that was okay. I was just happy to be doing anything in the water. The swim went fine. Then you had the cycle. So the cycle was unlike anything I've ever cycled on before. I'm a road bike cyclist. In London, there's not many mountain trails, if any, but there's very few off-road trails as well. It's difficult to get. I didn't actually have a mountain bike. I borrowed it just for the race, so I didn't really have a time to practice on it. So again, a lot of things that I could learn next time to have a bit more prep for. But yeah, going into that race, that bike leg really was brutal, and I learned that the hard way during the race. I was clipped in with cycling shoes, and that let me down. So as I was cycling, my feet were clipped in, and there was a few times on very steep climbs where the wheel would skid out. I'd come to a complete stop and I wouldn't be able to unclip both feet straight away. And I did actually fall off twice quite early on, stationary, so they weren't bad falls, but enough to make me not want to clip in again. So I spent most of the cycle out cycling on my heels, which wasn't ideal. And on the way back, I just ditched the shoes. I stayed in my trail running shoes, and it was much better because I could just jump off if I needed to stop, if I couldn't get the traction. Getting to the mountain, so obviously we knew it wasn't going to be a full summit, but we knew it was going to be pretty high. There was a checkpoint. So each of these races, there's a checkpoint. You have to reach a certain distance up the mountain by a certain time. And this one, you had 4 hours from the start of the race to get 5 kilometers up Ben Nevis. And this came a lot closer than I wanted it to. So I made it with 9 minutes to go. On the cycle leg, I did stop to help someone for 5 to 10 minutes. He'd fallen off his bike into a ditch. So I just checked in on him, got him back up out of the ditch. And yeah, that's part of the community aspect of triathlons. You don't just leave someone there, obviously. But in terms of the checkpoint, it was tough. It was a mental thing where in my mind, because I was already exhausted, I'd almost told myself, you're not going to make this. And I started to, whilst I was walking up the mountain, I started to come up with all these like narratives in my head. You're not going to make it. That means you're not going to complete the trilogy. It's not going to count. You're going to have to do it again. You're going to have to come back next year and do all 3 again. And I don't really know what happened, but I just kept moving and I sped up a bit. I just really, really wanted to make that checkpoint. And in the end, I made it with 9 minutes to go. So I was quite happy with that. It was by far the closest I'd come compared to the other 2 races of not making it. But I made it. So I carried on to the top. It was slow, but it was good fun. Coming back down was okay. It was better. And then clipping in for that, well, not clipping in fact, but getting back on the bike for that return leg. And that was rough. That felt like I was just in the lowest gear, climbing for well over an hour before I got any form of downhill. And arguably it was almost that. It was a lot of uphill. And again, it was that sort of 700 meters of elevation in 26 kilometers of travel. So yeah, really slow speeds, but a real just in the zone grit. And again, it took me back to that moment, that sort of marathon moment where I just wasn't thinking about anything. I was just pedaling. And anytime something came into my mind that I couldn't do it, I would just push that to the side, just kept pedaling. Any little bit of potential cramp, just try not to think about it. It will go away. Luckily, it didn't come. But I made it. And the total time for that one was the longest out of the 3. And that was 8 hours and 40 minutes. And that was the biggest thing. All 3 of these were over 7 hours. And whilst the people who finish first do them in phenomenally quick times for 4 to 5 hours, it's really impressive. I wasn't really going for time, but being in that state of exercising for 7 or 8 hours is such a experience that not many people have. And I'm glad that I did it, and I'm glad that I've done it 3 times in a sense that I've now learned how that feels, and I've learned from it. I've taken into the next one. I've learned from that, taken into the next one. And it just gives me that base of evidence that I've spoken about before, where I can now look at things and think, I can do that. Even if it's shit in the moment, I can push through it and I can do that. So looking back at all 3 of them, they all offered the same challenges, but also different challenges at the same time. So I would say like Wales definitely tested my preparation skills. So not knowing what I was going into could have played a part, absolutely. But my preparation wasn't good enough, my nutrition-wise, and my recce of the route really let me down. But again, I learned from those going forward. England tested my ability to combat that heat with that maintaining hydration. And again, from what I've spoken about, I didn't do an excellent job, but I managed to make it work, and I managed to have enough water, some one way or another, few less Skittles. That's fine. It's a trade. Then Scotland was different because of the terrain. Obviously, the temperature was cooler, but the terrain of that bike, having never been on a mountain bike ever really, definitely not on that sort of terrain, it was just, yeah, eye-opening to see what I'm capable of adapting to. So seeing, like, testing my adaptation to that skill, because it's definitely different. And most people there were road bikers, and we were all saying the same things to each other. So it was nice to know that I wasn't the only one feeling that way. Yes, they all challenged me to dig in, and I suppose that's the overarching theme, is just that determination, that grit. And I've done enough challenges now with last year's things that I discussed earlier, with this year's trilogy, that I'm really aware now that I can dig in when that time comes. My body is capable of a lot more than maybe I think it can be. But yeah, I'm just going to run over like 3 lessons that I've taken away from it, which is a massive understatement. I've taken way more than 3, but I just wanted to break down 3 lessons that I've taken from the ROC Trilogy this year. So number 1 is that the body is capable of way more than you think. Your mind will tell you to stop, and it will want you to stop. It will want you to get out of that discomfort as quickly as possible, because it's there to protect you. And you can understand why it's doing that, but your body can keep pushing way further than you think. And that's something that I learned. And that's something that David Goggins speaks about, in fact, in his book is people don't push themselves anywhere near their full potential because of that. Because when that mindset comes in, you've got 2 choices. You can either accept it and bail, or you can just keep pushing, not think about it, and then prove yourself wrong. So yeah, getting used to that uncomfortable feeling, and your body is capable. Number 2 is the nutrition side of it. So obviously I've learned about the nutrition, but for anyone listening, when you're going to do a race which requires this nutrition on the go, make sure you've tested it. Make sure you've learned and tried different things, because everyone's different. You may get someone say, oh, you should definitely try this gel or this powder, but everyone is different. Everyone's guts react differently to things. So try things, understand how many carbs per hour your body needs. There's guidelines, but don't take them as gospel. Just learn your body and really test them ahead of time, because I definitely learned that the hard way in Wales, where my body decided to cramp up on me because I hadn't had enough of what I should have had. Number 3, the lesson is people are amazing. And again, that's one that I've spoken about before in different terms. So I've spoken about it before, where the people I speak to on this podcast are amazing, and the stories that they bring and the insights and knowledge that I've been learning, and hopefully you've been learning as well, are fantastic. But I'm talking about the community aspect of sports, and there's not a lot of places where you can get into that sort of community. So the triathlon community is fantastic. I know like running communities now are really growing. BJJ, there's a great community there as well. And whatever your sport is, there's communities to be had in all of them. And because you're all going through the same thing, you can really understand everyone around you. So whilst you're on that slog during that 8th hour of the race, you might feel alone. You might feel like you're not sure why you're doing this. You might start to question yourself. But then someone passes you and you have a little chat for a minute or 2, and suddenly you realize that we're all in this together. Everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone's struggling as much as each other. And it's just a fantastic thing. So yeah, surrounding yourself with good communities like that is fantastic and recommended. So I just want to finish off then with what's next. So obviously that's 2024 pretty much done. That was my main challenge for the year. Looking forward to next year. So for the rest of this year, definitely a bit of rest, just a bit of a wind down. Obviously maintaining my fitness. Want to get back into BJJ, so jiu-jitsu. I sort of put that on hold temporarily to train for these races because of the amount of intensity, the amount of frequency that I needed to train for over the course of a week or a month. And when I was adding jiu-jitsu into it, it was just tipping me over into overtraining. And I had to make that difficult decision to just pause it, knowing that I can come back to it. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing now and seeing where that goes as well. But yeah, maintaining my cardio levels and then going into next year. So next year or two, definitely looking at doing an Ironman. I want to do that with my partner as well. So that's definitely on our list to do together. And I think I'm just going to enjoy taking part in slightly less time consuming events. So with colleagues and friends, half marathons, fun runs, 10Ks, just trying to maybe PB in some of those distances, and obviously still time consuming to an extent, but definitely not as much as training for what I've been training for. So I'm looking forward to the next year of training and seeing where that will take me. I'm sure that people will pop up with little suggestions of you should do this challenge or this event, and I'll be tempted and maybe I'll say yes to some. I don't know. But yeah, that brings me to the end of the episode. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've found some value in it. And I hope if you've done any challenging events that you've maybe resonated, or you've maybe learned from me, or if you've got something coming up, maybe you've just something sparked in your mind and you might think about your nutrition a bit more, for example. But yeah, I hope it has brought you some value. If it has, please do share it with someone that would enjoy it as well. So if you've got any other triathlete friends out there who want a new challenge, recommend the ROC Trilogy. It was awesome. But share the episode with them. They can listen to it firsthand. If you can rate the show, so wherever you listen to this show or watch it, yeah, rate it, whatever you feel is worthy of. I appreciate that, and it really helps the show. You can also follow us online. So on Instagram, we are at Lonely Chapter Podcast. We're also the same at TikTok, so at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And on Twitter, it is at Lonely_Chapter. Lastly from me, thank you for listening.